This is Ben Television News Roundup, a compilation of major stories in the week ending. I am Tunde Alabi. Thank you for being part of the program today. Labour leader Jeremy Corbyn has berated the government for cutting 46% from bus budget in England, causing bus fares to rise by 13% more than inflation. He stated that cutting 500 bus routes annually has left more people isolated. Meanwhile, reacting during the Prime Minister's question time, the Prime Minister Theresa May stated that government has always worked with local authorities who have responsibilities for managing the buses.
Fares rising above inflation, passenger numbers falling, and services being cut. Does the Prime Minister accept her failure on yet another public services, the buses?
Can I first of all say to the Right Honourable Gentleman that I absolutely agree with him, and I'm sure all members of this House, that our thanks should go to the firefighters and the troops who have been struggling to deal with these terrible fires that we have seen on the moorlands in the north of Britain. On the point about the buses, I would merely point out to him that actually I think we should look at the responsibility that local authorities have up and down this country for the buses. But can I also just comment on a remark that the Right Honourable Gentleman made about putting sufficient funding into the National Health Service? At the last election, the Labour Party said that giving the NHS an extra 2.2% a year would make it the envy of the world. Well, we're not giving it an extra 2.2% or indeed 2.5% or 3%. We're giving it an extra 3.4% a year. Now he tries to say that's not enough. What should we believe? What he said before the election or what he says after the election?
Jeremy Corbyn!
Mr. Speaker, in case the Prime Minister had forgotten, my question was about buses. and since 2010, her government has cut 46% from bus budgets in England. Passenger numbers are falling, and amongst elderly and disabled, it's fallen by 10%. Her government belatedly committed to keeping the free bus pass, but a bus pass isn't much use if there isn't a bus. So does the Prime Minister think it's fair that bus fares have risen by 13% more than inflation since 2010?
The Right Honourable Gentleman. He says that he asked originally in his first question about buses. He did indeed, and I gave him an answer in reference to buses. But what he cannot do is simply stand up and make assertions about what the government is doing without expecting those to be challenged, which is exactly what I did on his funding for the National Health Service. What we have seen across the country, and it was right that we made that commitment in relation to bus passes. What we have seen across the country is that we are seeing that as people's working habits are changing, that we are seeing people less usage of buses around the country. But this is something that we work with local authorities on. There are many responsibilities that local authorities have in relation to buses, and I suggest that he ask some of those local authorities what they're doing about the buses in their own area.
Corbyn!
Mr. Speaker, under this government, fares have risen 3 times faster than people's pay. Bus users are often people on lower income whose wages are lower than they were 10 years ago in real terms and have suffered a benefit freeze. And this government, under their stewardship, has cut 500 bus routes every year, leaving many people more isolated, lonely and damaging our local communities. Does the Prime Minister believe that bus services are a public responsibility or just something you leave to the market?
Can I say to the Right Honourable Gentleman, and I made the point on 2 occasions about the responsibilities that others have in relation to buses. So he might, for example, look at what the Mayor of London, who I last looked at was a Labour politician, is doing in relation to buses in London. But he talks also about the impact of fares on low-income people. It is important that we consider the situation of people who are on low incomes. That's why it is this government that introduced the national living wage and has increased the national living wage. That is why it is this government that has taken 4 million people out of paying income tax altogether. That is helping people on low incomes in this country.
Jeremy Corbyn!
Mr. Speaker, when Sadiq Khan ran for Mayor of London, he promised to freeze bus fares, and you know what he's done? Frozen bus fares. If she's concerned... If she's concerned about the travel card fares, speak to the Secretary of State for Transport. He's the one that sets that fare. Mr. Speaker, bus routes are being wiped out. 26 million fewer journeys made across the north of England and the Midlands under her government. So much for a northern powerhouse and a Midlands engine. Can we be clear? Does the Prime Minister think that deregulation of the bus industry, putting profit before passengers, has been a success or a failure?
Can I say to the right honourable gentleman, he talks about what the Mayor of London has done. What have we seen on the number of people using buses in London? It's gone down under the current Mayor. But if he wants to talk about what mayors are doing, I'm very happy to talk about what Andy Street, the Conservative in the West Midlands, has done. He's extended free bus fares to apprentices and students.
Jeremy Corbyn!
Mr. Speaker, it'll be a Labour government that saves the bus industry and a Labour government that gives free fares to under 26-year-olds. Mr. Speaker, the truth is, since deregulation, fares have risen faster than inflation, ridership has fallen, and these private bus monopolies have made a profit since 2010 of £3.3 billion. That's what the Tories give you in public transport. The government has given Metro mayors the powers to franchise and regulate to secure better services. Why won't the government extend that power to all local authorities?
Say to the right honourable gentleman that, of course, the local authorities do have some responsibilities and capabilities in relation to subsidising bus routes and fares. And yes, we have given those powers to the Metro mayors. But can I also say to the right honourable gentleman, he talked a little earlier about referenced what was happening in the Northern Powerhouse and the Midlands engine. I'll tell him what's happening in the Northern Powerhouse and the Midlands engine. More investment in our public transport, more investment in our roads, more investment in the infrastructure that brings jobs to people in the North and people across the Midlands.
Jeremy Corbyn!
It's a shame this government is so shy of giving powers to local authorities and instead more interested in cutting their resources. But, Mr. Speaker, under this government, bus services are in crisis. Fares are increasing, routes being cut, passenger numbers falling, isolating elder and disabled people, damaging communities' high streets, and actually leading to more congestion in our towns and cities. People spending more time travelling to work or school. It's bad for our climate change commitments, bad for our air quality. So will the Prime Minister at last recognise the crucial importance of often the only mode of transport available for many people and end the cuts to bus budgets and give councils the power to ensure everyone gets a regulated bus service wherever they live?
The right honourable gentleman, I'll take no lessons from the right honourable gentleman in devolution to local authorities. Which party is it that has established those Metro mayors and given them those powers? It's the Conservative Party in government. Which party is it that is doing growth deals around the country, giving new responsibilities and local authorities? It is this Conservative government. And what did we see in the North East? When we were talking to Labour councils in the North East about them having a devolution deal, Labour council leaders in the North East rejected that devolution. That's what the Labour Party is doing. He wants to know what this government is delivering for the people of this country, for the North, the South, the Midlands, for every part of this country. Record high employment, rising wages, falling borrowing, stronger environmental protection and a Britain fit for the future.
As President Donald Trump prepares to visit the UK on 12th July, there are indications that he will be greeted by different protests across the United Kingdom as he arrives the country, although his visit is not classified as a state visit.
Britain is basking in a heat wave and the political temperature is rising. The coming visit of Donald Trump has energized those opposed to the US president's views on issues like immigration and climate change.
I'll be out there protesting. I'm not really a demonstration sort of person, but I feel quite strongly that he shouldn't be welcomed.
I don't particularly agree with a lot of things he's done, but at the same time I think he'd done well for America, I think. So, yeah, I think he should come, I guess, as an ally.
It would be good for him to come, for him to see what the reaction of the people here.
Protests are planned in London, although they'll be kept well away from the president.
We don't want a tiny but vocal and quite aggressive minority to be portrayed as the wider British population.
President Trump and British Prime Minister Theresa May got off to a good start at the White House in 2017, but the so-called special relationship is now being tested.
The retweeting of the far-right video produced a storm of conversation in Parliament, protests on the streets, and he's coming here right on the back of the tariffs that have been lodged against Europe, on the back of pulling out of the Iran deal, and most perhaps recently the very bad press coverage of his policy of separating families, parents from their children.
Donald Trump's visit comes at a critical time for Britain as it leaves the European Union. The government sees a strong economic and security relationship with the United States as crucial to a successful future outside the EU.
In an era of Brexit, we need to be building alliances around the globe, and there is no stronger alliance that we've ever had than the United States of America.
But does President Trump attach the same priority to Britain?
I suspect that there will be an affirmation of America's relationship with the UK, of a commitment to, some sort of trade deal. But I suspect we'll see very little after he leaves. They'll return to some of the topics that we would expect: the security, cooperation, NATO.
A NATO summit in Brussels immediately precedes Trump's London visit, and afterward he is scheduled to fly to Helsinki to meet his Russian counterpart, Vladimir Putin, on July 16th.
It's right in between two other visits that are much more important, frankly, to the American president.
As thousands of protesters prepare to take to the streets, the optics could play a big part in how it is perceived on both sides of the Atlantic.
Rescue ship carrying migrants picked up from rubber boats in the Mediterranean Sea has arrived at Spanish port after being refused entry by Italy and Malta. Tens of thousands of migrants have reached European shores this year. Meanwhile, southern European countries have refused ships carrying migrants to dock at their ports.
The open arms ship docked in the port of Barcelona in northeastern Spain after a 4-day journey. Its passengers were picked up from smugglers' boats off the coast of Libya, but were refused docking in Malta and in Italy. The rescuers say that Malta and Italy now deny docking to vessels used by non-governmental groups, and as a result, many people die at the sea.
We managed to rescue 60 migrants. Unfortunately, almost 500 other people have died in the last 4 days trying to cross from Libya to Europe.
European coastal countries have been criticized for refusing to allow migrants to disembark.
Look, during these last 6 months, 50,000 people have arrived in Europe from North Africa through the Mediterranean Sea. Aren't we, 500 million Europeans, capable of managing the arrival of 50,000 people? The borders, and this trip is a good example, the borders we have in Europe are not Greek or Italian or Spanish borders, they are European borders.
But the waves of migrants from Africa may not stop for decades, and many Europeans are concerned about the burden they pose. Anti-immigrant movements are on the rise, and some countries refuse to accept any migrants. German Chancellor Angela Merkel said in an interview aired Sunday that the so-called frontline states need help processing the migrants.
Die Transitzentren haben eine Begrenzung.
The transit centers are limited because according to our constitution, we are only allowed to limit a person's freedom for a maximum of 48 hours. That means that within this time, which is until the end of the next day, the transfer to the next country must be completed.
French President Emmanuel Macron is pushing for the creation of centers for processing migrants in North Africa, so only those who are granted asylum can come to Europe.
But what we have to do is obviously first to fight against smugglers. That's my top priority. That's what we do in Sahel. That's what we want to do with Libyan governments. That's why we have to fix the Libyan situation to stop that.
European countries have long called on Libya to do more to stop the smuggling of people from its shores. But the illegal business is flourishing as desperate people pay exorbitant amounts to get on a rubber boat that may take them to death or a better life.
Rescuers in Thailand are considering evacuating the football teenagers that are trapped in a cave with their coach. The things were discovered in one of the country's largest caves, which is now flooded due to the weather condition. Meanwhile, parents of the trapped boys have expressed their relief that the boys aged between 11 to 16 are alive, but their ordeal are far from being over.
Thai Navy SEAL officers, including medics, made their way through murky waters deep into the cave where the boys and their coach have been trapped for 10 days. Officials say the boys have weakened in the cave, which makes the rescue efforts more difficult.
If the water level goes down, the kids will be able to walk out from the front of the cave. If not, they might have to dive. If they dive, we will have to use a full mask, which we are waiting for now.
Diving through several kilometers of floodwater is hard even for experienced divers, but these boys would need to learn to dive and also build the strength for the dangerous journey.
The minimum requirement to train someone just in the breathing apparatus would be 3 days. But I would suggest that these children or these kids are then going into a very extreme sort of environment where water, it's moving water, it's dirty water, and the distances are to the extremes.
The rescue efforts currently are focused on getting divers to take food and other supplies to the 13 trapped in case they have to stay in the cave until the monsoon season ends, which is in September. A U.S. servicewoman says rescuers are looking for the safest option.
So this is Thai-led, and what is the best course of action to extract these children in the safest way possible? Because that really is paramount. When you think about it, you know, they've been isolated, dark, no food. There's not only like physiological considerations, but probably psychological considerations.
A Thai school soccer team and their coach had cycled to the 10-kilometer-long cave after a training session and got trapped inside by heavy monsoon rains. Early rescue efforts were hampered by the rising floodwater.
A wedding dress all made with toilet papers has been unveiled in New York contest. The entire design has been made of toilet papers and it's been worn proudly by a yet-to-be bride. The dress also won the contest with $10,000 prize.
Only the sound of rustling paper reveals the uniqueness of this wedding dress contest as finalists proudly show off their somewhat fragile gowns.
This dress is worth 250 hours of hard work and 32 rolls of toilet paper and 23 rolls of scotch tape and lots of glue and a very loving, helpful husband who cooked while I was busy gluing.
Susan Nicholson is from Georgia. Next year, her daughter Bianca is getting married, and she knows far too well how much wedding dresses can cost. And although Bianca decided against sporting a paper gown on her own big day, she's helping her mom put together some paper jewelry for the contest.
The necklace is the same thing. It's with the toilet paper too. I love it. It's beautiful.
The jury takes the contest seriously, and the standards are very high. Out of the 1,500 submitted entries, only 10 dressmakers made it to the finals. But their creations are truly amazing, especially considering that they were allowed to use only toilet paper, glue, scissors, duct tape, and thread. The idea of a contest featuring disposable, chic, but definitely not easy to produce wedding dresses first occurred to founders of the wedding website Cheap Chic Weddings 14 years ago.
I gotta tell you, from a distance, you can't tell if it's the real thing or what. I mean, the product itself is so good that that as we looked at many of the dresses and seeing unique uses of it, it's just amazing what many of these designers are able to create.
Corsets, lace, hats, and veils, toilet paper masterfully used at the contest never looked so good. Contest winner Roy Cruz says he spent hours and hours on this veil.
In one square, I spent like 1 and 30 minutes every night. So my sister told me, "Oh my God, do you think you're gonna finish that?" Oh, I'm gonna do this.
And the winner is Ronaldo Cruz.
But all his hard work paid off. The contest winner gets $10,000. So Roy, who last year lost his job as a florist, can now fly to the Philippines and spend some quality time with his family. Still, today's finalists are not destined to be worn. Since the contest started, only one dress ended up at a real wedding. The bride just made sure the weather on her big day was nice and sunny.
And with that, we conclude the news roundup for this week. Thank you for being part of the program. Enjoy the rest of your week. Bye. Regardless residents status abroad, living outside the shores of one's homeland can really be challenging and sometimes very difficult. Let's be sincere, to keep pace with updates from the host country abroad can really be difficult. Here on Dialogue in Diaspora, we give you every information, every news, every current issue you need to know on updates outside the UK. Dialogue in Diaspora is your link between the world and the United Kingdom. It's your window to Africa development. Here, live on BENTVNEWSROUNDUP.